Well, hello and welcome to another edition of In the Trenches podcast. I'm your host, Seth Root, and with me we have a very special guest. His name is Jeff Sikkenga. He is the executive director of the Ashbrook Center and professor of political science at Ashland University. Jeff has been at Ashland and connected to the Ashbrook Center since 1997, serving as an adjunct fellow of the center, a faculty member in Ashbrook's Teaching American Histories program, co director of the Ashbrook Scholar Program, and interim executive director. Mr. Sikkenga, uh, glad to have you on.
Thanks for having me, Seth. Glad to be here.
Well, Mr. Sikkenga, I thought before we talk a little bit about Ashland University and what it's about, its purpose and all, I thought it would be kind of cool to if you could give a little background into yourself, um, because when you were on the New Thinkery podcast, there were some things that I didn't know about you, and I thought maybe the listeners probably would like to hear it. So, please just give a little background to into yourself.
Sure. Well, I was born and raised actually in Muskegon, Michigan. So I'm from Western Michigan. My strange last name is Dutch. That's a lot of people in that area are Dutch. But I went on, I decided for college to leave the state and I went to University of Virginia and studied there in Charlottesville with a guy that some of your listeners probably know, Professor Jim Caesar, who was a really eminent political scientist and developer of the discipline of American political development. And it was really with Jim that I got my first real taste of studying America, its history and its political principles in a really serious and sustained way, and really fell in love with that. And we went to graduate school. And then after that, ended up here at Ashland University at the Ashbrook Center back in January of 97.
And I did have a question because recently we had Gary Schmidt on, who also works very closely, I think, with James Caesar, and I think he also is a teacher there at University of Virginia. Did you take any classes with him and with Herbert Storing, who I think also was working there? I know he died shortly thereafter, but I was curious if you had any classes with any of those people while
Unfortunately, I
there.
didn't. Herb Storing actually passed away just before I got there. It was a great loss to the university and to the whole, frankly, the whole discipline of political science. He was such a profound scholar of lots of things in America, but as I think everybody knows, his book on the Anti-Federalists was really path-breaking. So it's a real tragedy for the students at University of Virginia and for the discipline and frankly for America and the study of America that we lost Herb so early.
Yeah, I've been influenced by you know Herbert Storing, and his book Toward a More Perfect Union has been definitely influential on me. So that's why I asked if you had any stories or anything like that from Herb. But um, going on to your work at the Ashbrook Center, though, I mean, I know maybe some of our listeners probably know a little bit about the Ashbrook Center, but if you don't mind, if you could tell us a little bit about about it and your guys' approach and how you teach students and teachers too, um, if you don't mind.
Sure, sure. The Ashbrook Center is named after Congressman John Ashbrook, who passed away, unfortunately, tragically, while he was campaigning for U.S. Senate in 1982 for the state of Ohio. And in his honor, a group of his friends got together and said, we need to commemorate John by establishing a center that will perpetuate his principles. So they founded the Ashbrook Center in 1983. Ronald Reagan came and actually gave the inaugural address of the center back in May of 1983. And then not long after that, the next year, they started an undergraduate honors program in history and politics at here at Ashland University. And the center has really grown dramatically since those early days in the 80s. We started adding, well, the scholar program itself for undergraduates started with about a dozen students, and now we have over 125 from all around the country. And we started our doing work with teachers in the 90s, in the late 90s. We added a master's program. In 2005, the teachers really came to us and said, we love these seminars that you're doing. In fact, one teacher drove all the way from Alabama to little old Ashland, Ohio, every one Saturday a month. And that kind of dedication, we knew we were onto something. And so we started a master's program for teachers in the content area of American history and government in 2005. And then again, the teachers came to us and said, could you do, could you take this kind of a program out around the country to where teachers are? So in 2013, 14, we started that, our Teaching American History seminars and programs, where we go around the country and do seminars led by faculty members on great texts and primary documents in American history and government, again, designed for teachers. So that those programs, and along the way, we've continued our work with citizens. We still have a lecture series. We've had Ronald Reagan, George H.W. Bush. We've had Justice Clarence Thomas. We've had Margaret Thatcher, Benjamin Netanyahu, among others, who have come and spoken here on campus. So it's really work with students, teachers, and citizens. And it's all focused on this idea of educating people for self-government. That's our fundamental task. That's what it was in '83, and we continue with that mission.
From what I understand from students who have been students of the Ashbrook Center and such, it seems like your method of teaching students is very different from how normal colleges and universities operate. You know,
Yeah, I hope
from
it's considerably less corrupt.
yeah, and I guess that's the what I was gonna ask is how is it different and what you kind of um hope for when you, for instance, use a Socratic method versus just some guy lecturing and whatnot. What are the pros and cons, so to speak?
Yeah, look, I mean, there's a lot of great professors all around the country doing this at institutions and universities everywhere around the country. But at Ashbrook, we've really tried to gather faculty and students together who want to do this kind of approach to education, and because we really we call it the Ashbrook way of teaching and learning. It's a name for something that goes all the way back, as you said, to Socrates. It's just a name for a way of understanding education, which is that education is not primarily about ingesting information. It's definitely not about indoctrination, but it's about discovering the truth, pursuing the truth with others, and discovering the truth. And we really think the best way to do that is through conversation. So, as you said, we don't do lectures, we don't do textbooks, we have primary documents. So, if we want to understand the Constitution, we read the Constitution, we read the Federalist Papers, we read the Federalist arguments. We go back to the original sources. If we want to understand Aristotle, we read Aristotle and talk about him. So, and we sit around tables and have those kind of conversations. And we really think that is, the whole approach is really based on Aristotle's idea that all human beings desire to know, but they don't want to be told. They want to discover it for themselves. And we found that conversation is the best way to make that discovery. So but we don't think, we think of the conversation, of course, as the professor and students, the students with each other, but also the professor and students, because professors are really just more advanced students. They're having a conversation with the great minds and statesmen of the past. And we think of education as that kind of conversation across time and with each other about the central fundamental questions that animate history and politics. And that's the way we do it. And it's interesting, it's really powerful, it's challenging, it's hard. But once you get used to that, I think it really opens people's minds in the best way to really freely pursuing the truth with each other.
One of the things that, I totally sympathize with that and wish more uh, colleges and universities would do that. But I was wondering, because you're not just a um, center that tries to talk about the truth, but also try to talk about American history and American regime, and and so I kind of wonder, do you see the tension between liberal education versus civic education? Like, that there is you in liberal education, at least as Socrates kind of talked about, was trying to pursue the truth no matter what, whatever regime you're in. And then there's this civic education which tries to um talk about what it is to live in this regime and such. So do you see that tension, and what do you say um to people like me who wonder how can we make this compatible?
Yeah, that's a great question, a very deep, kind of profound question that we think about a lot actually, because we live in that tension with our student programs and with our teacher programs. I mean, really, we base all our programs on two fundamental principles that are kind of the axioms, as Lincoln would have put it, of our education. The first is we really believe, like Thomas Jefferson said in the Virginia Statute of Religious Freedom, that Almighty God hath created the mind free. So we really believe in the freedom of the human mind. And therefore, for example, we think that education is about free minds together pursuing the truth together. The other principle that animates the way we do education is that America is free. And you talked about our focus on America. And we do have an undergraduate program that focuses on the great texts of America and the Western tradition, and frankly, the important world traditions. So our students will read Xenophon, for example. It's one of their very first books. They'll read Aristotle's Politics, among others. Um, but we really do have a particular focus on America, and we believe that America is free in the sense that it was founded on principles of freedom, of self government, and that our history really is, well, the story actually of our struggle to live up to those founding principles. That's the intellectual architecture for all our programs, but we don't impose that on the students. We don't impose that on teachers in the seminars. We say, let's just sit together and read this book, Federalist or Aristotle or whatever it is, and just ask, what does this mean? And let's just start with that. And that's hard enough to figure out. And then think through the debates. What's the debate between Stephen Douglas and Abraham Lincoln on the founders' principles? What's the debate between John C. Calhoun and Frederick Douglass on slavery? And just let all sides speak and think through the arguments that they're making. So we always say that, this question of civic education and liberal education, our goal is to make, and we think this is true in America, civic education is the education of citizens in the history and really the principles and habits of the regime, as you put it. Liberal education is an education for freedom, for freely pursuing truth, beauty, goodness, and governing yourself. We try to put those two together and live in that tension by saying our goal is to create thoughtful patriots, because we really believe in America that to you it's not right for Americans, if I can put it this way, to love America without understanding why America is lovable. But to understand that, they have to figure that out and come to that understanding for themselves. So we try to connect the pursuit of this truth to the ultimate aim of patriotism, but not any kind of patriotism, a patriotism that's born of understanding the principles of the regime. So in America, we think that we can kind of put these two things together in an interesting and unique way. Tocqueville called that reflective patriotism, and we call it thoughtful patriotism, and that's the kind of education that we're looking for.
Hold on. So one question I had, because since you were talking about thoughtful patriots and all that, was it seems like today's students though have a hard time understanding the principles of our regime and our history. Uh, I know that the American Council of Trustee and Alumni kind of puts out these reports about um, how much the students don't know about their history.
Yeah,
And
it's actually really pretty shocking.
yeah, yeah. I mean, for instance, only 30% of college students don't know who the father of the Constitution is. It is quite shocking, and I'm assuming that it's gone worse since they put that particular report out. But what can you just tell us, what the Ashbrook does to make sure that they understand principles? I know you talked about um reading the documents themselves, which is important, to getting them to understand what makes our regime so lovable. But are there any other things that you do at the Ashbrook Center to make these principles known to the students?
Yeah, it's a serious crisis. I mean, there's another report, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, which gave a test in 2018 to students across the country. This was in, I think they were middle school and high school students, middle school, I think, and 28% scored proficient. Only 28% scored proficient on civics, and only 15% scored proficient on American history. So, I mean, in one sense, the crisis of civic education is definitely just a crisis of ignorance. People just don't know. And it's, how can you keep a republic? Benjamin Franklin's famous phrase, right? What have you given us, Mr. Franklin? And he says, a republic if you can keep it. How can you keep a republic if you don't know what a republic is?
Right.
I mean, that's just a basic problem of civic literacy. But we also think the problem is deeper than that, and the crisis is more profound than that, actually, because it's not just a crisis, really, of facts and information, but also of understanding and devotion. That's how we think about it. That it's not just knowing the facts about separation of powers, but understanding why separation of powers is essential to a free society. And students don't know the what of America too often, but they also don't know the why of America. And they're often not being taught that. They don't really see America as a great conversation and even debate about fundamental principles of justice. They don't see our history as kind of a story with a narrative arc. And so it's not surprising that even the students who know the what, like the students who take AP US history, they might know a lot of discrete facts about US history, but do they have any sense of a coherent story or narrative? Do they have any sense of the fundamental animating debates and discussions over this country that have taken place throughout our history? I think the general answer is, unless they have a really good teacher, they don't know those things. And so I think actually their ignorance and apathy is a result of the problem of not knowing facts is actually the effect of the crisis. It's not the crisis itself. So we really say we got to go back and get at the deepest level of this and help people understand these principles are important and alive. They define what it means to be an American. So it matters for us. And you're part of this shared story of America. And if people can come to see that, and I've seen students do that, man, they just come alive and they want to know more. That's really, it's our way of education that we think is most appropriate to meet the crisis that we're in. But there's no denying absolutely that it is a crisis.
Yeah, I mean, you it's one thing to be, I know, ignorant about our nation's history. That can be um, changed, through education and stuff. But I think, as you said, it's worse in that I think we just don't know, the story behind what made us so great and lovable. Um, that it kind of uh, makes it difficult, so to speak. Your job to do what you guys do at the Ashbrook Center. Um, so, but there is this competing, I say, story too, right? That people like the 1619 project has put out, and
Oh, yes.
critical race theory, stuff like that. So how do you, and I know you don't indoctrinate, your students and stuff, but how do you push back to find the truth of our story? Um,
You know what we do? We just let the past speak for itself. So take the 1619 project. It clearly has, at least in my opinion, an ideological agenda. There's no question about that. The founder of it has said that. Um, the way you fight that uh, is by proposing a positive alternative that's way more interesting and engaging to all students, and that brings out the best in all students and doesn't divide people into different types and have them be suspicious or hostile to each other. And I really do think that is one of the effects of critical race theory and the 1619 project of not just exacerbating, but in some ways creating divisions among Americans, where the study of our principles in history, not whitewashing anything, being fully cognizant of America's failures to live up to these principles, but understanding those principles and the shared story of the struggle to live up to those, including the failure, brings people together in a way and does not divide them. It's fundamentally hopeful, not antagonistic or pessimistic. So I've seen it resonate with students when they do that. And you do it by exposing them to people like Frederick Douglass, who is completely absent from the 1619 project because he just doesn't fit their ideological narrative. So when students get a chance to meet the mind of a great thinker and statesman like Frederick Douglass, who is one of the greatest Americans who ever lived, without question, in my view, probably the second greatest American of the 19th century behind Lincoln. Um, they that easy narrative that they're given is shattered, and they have to think for themselves then. So I think it's just introducing them to these great thinkers, these great texts, these great arguments, taking them seriously. It inoculates them, it shatters any preconceptions they have, and it inoculates them against ideological indoctrination that might be tried on them, because it just seems to them like it's not real education. And I always say to them, if you're sitting in a classroom and it doesn't seem liberating to you, like your mind is now thinking in a way it wasn't before, then you're in the wrong classroom.
What I know the Ashbrook Center, all the work it does. What are your hopes and stuff going forward for the Ashbrook Center, and what do you plan to do with the Ashbrook Center?
Yeah, I mean, I really feel like this is the Ashbrook moment. Uh, People now understand how important it is that Americans understand our fundamental principles, understand the American story, and have some devotion to the country based on a kind of thoughtful patriotism. They just see how important it is. When you see statues of George Washington and Abraham Lincoln being vandalized and toppled, you don't have to teach people, you don't have to convince people that our view of history actually matters. They see it happening. And I think a lot of people of goodwill, whatever their partisan political opinions, sense that we have to be, I mean, the Declaration of Independence calls us one people. We really do have to be that, based on some kind of shared principles in history. So Ashbrook's, I think our real moment is, we're ready for this. We've been doing this. We've been developing this for almost 30 years now, and 40 years. And we're really putting this forward. And my vision for Ashbrook, the goal of our board and our staff, is to take our programs fully to scale nationally and to present these opportunities for students and teachers and citizens all around the country. And that's the next step for us. We're already doing that. We're already doing national programs. We're bringing students from around the country to our undergraduate program here at Ashland University, but we really just want to become fully to scale nationally with what we've got. We think the country needs it. We think there's a big appetite for it among students and teachers and citizens. When we offer these programs, there's a great response. When I talk to citizens about this, there's a great response. People see how important civic education is now. It's undeniably essential for the future health of the Republic. So for us, it's just taking us fully to scale nationally to meet the current crisis.
And one of the things you're doing that is, from what I hear, you will be doing a podcast, I think, coming up very soon.
Yeah, that's
Um,
right. It's sort of part of this outreach that we're undergoing.
yeah, yeah, and this is something that will be done nationally, of course. So tell us a little bit about that podcast and what you're kind of hoping to do with it, and what I want to try and say this. What are you trying to reach students, or like what is the goal of this podcast?
Yeah, that's a good question. We're working through that as we do it. It's called the American Idea, and we're gonna we're having right now it's 12 core episodes on 3 eras in American history, sort of the founding era, centered around the Declaration of Independence, the Civil War era, centered around the Gettysburg Address, and then the Civil Rights era, centered around Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech. But really, 18th, 19th, and 20th century America, and these sort of three defining moments in American history where the fundamental question is, what is America? What do we
Right.
mean by America? And what does it mean to be an American? That's what we mean by the American idea. So we're putting those core episodes together. We hope that we're gonna turn it in actually to an online course that students, teachers, citizens can take, and really immerse themselves deeply in the study of American history and government and get something out of that. And then we're going to add other episodes outside the core episodes. The core episodes will really be on great documents like the Declaration of Independence, George Washington's farewell address, Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. And it'll be me talking with scholars and friends about the meaning of those documents. And then we're going to branch out from there to have other episodes talking with uh, thinkers, professors who have been thinking about America and American principles and texts and history, talk to public figures, policymakers, influential people in the media and government, and sort of how they think about America and how they apply those principles to the times in which we live. So it's going to have both of those elements, a kind of core of the American political tradition and those great texts and thoughts, and then the application of those to sort of contemporary issues. And we're really looking forward to it. We hope to launch July 4th and have episodes running out from there. We're already well underway in taping. It's been a great process so far. And well, I don't have to tell you, podcasts are really taking off, and a lot of people are listening to them. And we hope that, frankly, we hope that it's appropriate for students, teachers, and citizens, all three groups. It's really pitched to meet Americans where they are. And again, the fundamental question that for all of it is, what does it mean to be an American? And I think anybody who is an American, and even some who aren't Americans, want to know the answer to that. And that's the question we're going to be exploring.
Well, I'm sure podcasting is hard to do, so I salute, what you guys are doing, and
Yeah,
especially
maybe what we're doing is foolhardy. We'll find out.
yeah, well, I will definitely be listening, because even though I'm not a scholar by any means, but um I listen to this kind of stuff over and over again, because it is important to kind of reestablish yourself and the principles of the Declaration, the Constitution in our country. So I'll be looking forward to it. I'm excited for what the Ashland program is doing. Um, is there anything that I missed that you want to talk about when it comes to Ashland Center and what it does, um, or anything else?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I just appreciate you having me on. It's great to be with you and your listeners. And if people want to get to know more about Ashbrook and what we're doing, take a look at our website, ashbrook.org. We've got a lot of, tells you a lot about what we're doing, our programs, our history, so our basic mission and orientation, a lot of what I've described here. And then for teachers, we have a really great resource, teachingamericanhistory.org or TAH.org. So anybody who's a teacher or parents who are homeschooling kids or grandparents who have grandkids who might be interested in this, it's actually the largest online collection of primary source documents in American history and government for teachers anywhere in the world. We got about 2,500, 2,600 primary source documents, all curated very nicely to be used. So it's tah.org. Those are just a couple of resources that we have available. We've got all kinds of, we're putting together a 46 volume collection on called Core Documents Collection on core documents of American history and government, particular topics like the Supreme Court, which is one I edited, or one on the Civil War, particular eras in American history. And we're a little over halfway done with that. And it's a great resource. And that's also, I think you can find that on tah.org as well. So I'd just encourage your listeners to take a look at that and get to know us a little bit more. And look, we're always looking to make new friends, work with other folks in collaboration and partnership to advance the mission, because for us the mission is the thing that matters. And we really believe in the American experiment in self-government, and we want to do everything we can with other folks like that to perpetuate that experiment.
Well, Mr. Sikkenga, it's been a pleasure to have you on our show. I really appreciate it. Hopefully, we can have you back on to talk about Tocqueville or about Locke. I think you wrote a book about Locke, and we haven't gotten to him yet, but I know he's an important figure, so we might have to have you back on for that.
Well, I'm working on the book, but I'm always happy to talk about Tocqueville or Locke, great thinkers.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, signing off from In the Trenches. We'll see you next time.